You're watching a Highwire Media podcast.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the True Crime Never Sleeps show. As always, I'm your host, Larry Lease. And today we continue our series on the Zodiac killer, investigating the possible suspects and the expanding investigation. Before we do that, give me your thoughts on this case in the comment section below as always. And of course, leave a comment, whether it's a concern or a theory you might have. Just drop it in the comment section and I'll hopefully be able to respond to it. And without further ado, let's dive into today's episode. By the time investigators reached the late months of 1969, the Zodiac case had already become one of the most notorious unsolved crime series in California history. Law enforcement across multiple jurisdictions, including the San Francisco Police Department, Vallejo Police Department, and Napa County Sheriff's Office, were struggling to piece together the puzzle. The killer's letters, cryptic ciphers, and taunting phone calls added psychological pressure on detectives, while the steady stream of tips and false leads drained resources. Federal assistance was inevitable. At the height of the Zodiac scare, the FBI came increasingly involved in the investigation. Although the Bureau did not assume full control, the case remained under local jurisdiction. The FBI provided forensic laboratory support, ballistics comparison, and assistance from the Behavioral Science Unit. The FBI's role was to fill gaps in expertise that local departments lacked. By late 1969, BSU agents, including a young profiler named John Douglas, began offering insight into the killer's personality and likely behavioral patterns. Douglas, who would later become a household name for his work in criminal profiling, was then a relatively junior agent working with the FBI's National Training Academy at Quantico. He and his colleagues used a data-driven approach, comparing the Zodiac's crimes to patterns in other serial cases. They analyzed victimology, geographic factors, and the killer's written communications. Douglas noted that Zodiac seemed to enjoy controlling the public narrative through his letters, suggesting narcissism, sadism, and a desire for infamy. He also surmised that the suspect might have a background that allowed him to feel intellectually superior to investigators, possibly a history of military service, an interest in cryptography, or some college level education. At the same time, the FBI and local police collaborated on the famous composite sketch, based on eyewitness testimony from the October 1969 murder of cab driver Paul Stein. Officer Donald Fuke and several other witnesses described a white male, approximately 5'8 to 5'10, with a stocky build, glasses, and a round face. This sketch became iconic, plastered on wanted posters and newspaper articles throughout California. While the sketch offered the public a face, it also presented challenges. Eyewitness descriptions are notoriously unreliable, and thousands of tips poured in from people claiming the man resembled a neighbor, a coworker, or even an estranged family member. The combination of increased media scrutiny and interagency collaboration was a double-edged sword. While it provided more leads and manpower, it also introduced friction. Each department had its own theories and investigative priorities, and communication lapses occasionally led to missed opportunities. Detectives such as Dave Toschi and Bill Armstrong from SFPD grew frustrated with the bureaucracy. As Toschi would later recall in interviews, everyone had pieces of the puzzle, but nobody could put them together at the same time. Among the myriad names that came across investigators' desks, one man stood out more than any other: Arthur Leigh Allen, born in 1933. Allen was a former elementary school teacher from Vallejo, California, whose personal history and behavior raised serious red flags. He had been dismissed from teaching for inappropriate conduct with students, owned multiple firearms, and had an unusual fascination with cryptography. Details that seemed eerily aligned with the Zodiac profile. Allen's connection to the case deepened in July 1971 when his former friend Don Cheney reported to police that Allen had made disturbing comments about wanting to kill people and disguise the murders as part of a larger Zodiac-themed fantasy. Cheney told detectives that Allen once described tying a flashlight to a gun barrel to shoot in the dark, precisely the method the Zodiac had used at the Lake Herman Road attack in 1968. Allen also reportedly discussed the idea, excuse me, of attaching victims to trees or using his name Zodiac as part of a public campaign to terrorize the community. In addition to Cheney's statements, Allen's known activities placed him near several Zodiac crime scenes. He lived in Vallejo, close to where victims David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen were murdered in December 1968. He also spent time in Santa Rosa and other Bay Area locations that overlapped with the Zodiac correspondence postmarks. Investigators discovered that in 1969, Allen worked at the Zodiac Trading Post, a Vallejo area business whose name seemed like an uncanny coincidence. While it was never proven that Allen named the business or even found the name significant, the connection fueled further suspicion. Handwriting analysis complicated the picture. Multiple experts compared Allen's known samples to the Zodiac letters but could not make a definitive match. In fact, most concluded that Allen's handwriting differed from the suspects. However, skeptics argued that the Zodiac could have used a disguised style. Allen was ambidextrous and capable of altering his penmanship, and investigators theorized that he might have deliberately changed his writing to evade detection. The search of Allen's home in 1972 yielded numerous weapons, including knives and guns, as well as disturbing sexual paraphernalia and bomb-making diagrams. Yet, no conclusive evidence tied any of these items directly to the Zodiac crimes. While the case finally reached a forensic crossroads in the early 2000s, DNA samples extracted from stamps and envelopes used by the Zodiac failed to match Allen's profile. This negative DNA result significantly weakened the case against him, though it did not entirely eliminate the possibility of his involvement. Detective Ken Narlow at the Napa County Sheriff's Office summed up the frustration, saying, quote, "Allen fit the profile so well it was almost too perfect, but we could never close the gap between suspicion and proof." While the investigation into Arthur Leigh Allen gained traction, the FBI's BSU continued to refine its profile of the Zodiac. John Douglas and his colleagues drew parallels to other offenders who had used media manipulation as part of their MO. They posited that the Zodiac's need to control and recognition might eventually lead him to slip up, either by escalating his crimes or by inserting himself in the investigation. The profile suggested that the killer was likely male, white, in his late 20s to early 40s at the time of the murders, and familiar with the San Francisco Bay Area. He might have been socially awkward, struggled with relationships, and harbored resentment towards authority figures. His cryptic letters implied a high level of self-perceived intelligence, though the actual complexities of the ciphers varied. This profile informed investigative tactics. Police kept a close eye on known offenders who matched the criteria, conducted stakeouts of potential targets, and used decoy operations to lure the Zodiac into revealing himself. Unfortunately, these efforts often led to dead ends. The Bureau also played a key role in analyzing the Zodiac ciphers. While the first cipher, the 408-character cryptogram, was famously cracked by high school teacher Donald Hardin and his wife Betty, the later ciphers, including the infamous 340-character cipher, resisted decryption for decades. Behavioral profilers noted that the ciphers might serve less as genuine communication tools and more as a means of prolonging the killer's mystique. Douglas believed that the Zodiac derived a psychological satisfaction from frustrating both law enforcement and the public. For him, the game was as important as the crime. Douglas would later write in his memoir. The insight explained why the Zodiac occasionally made threats that were never carried out. Such as the threats to attack school buses. The threats alone were enough to sow fear, which fulfilled the killer's ultimate goal. Even as Arthur Leigh Allen dominated the public imagination, investigators evaluated numerous other suspects, each with their own suspicious histories. One name that gained traction in recent years is Gary Francis Post, a man whose identity was made public in 2021 by a team of independent cold case investigators known as the Case Breakers. Post, who died in 2018, had a criminal record and reportedly lived near some of the Zodiac crime scenes. The Case Breakers argued that photographs of Post bore similarities to the composite sketch and that cryptic messages he left behind could be linked to Zodiac ciphers. They also claimed that he trained young men in survival tactics and firearms, which they believed aligned with the Zodiac's operational skills. However, law enforcement, including the FBI and SFPD, publicly stated that he was not considered a confirmed suspect. No forensic evidence connected him to the crime scenes, and many of the claims made by the case breakers were circumstantial. Critics noted that the group relied heavily on pattern recognition and subjective interpretation of cryptic messages. Retired SFPD Detective Kevin Jones expressed skepticism, saying, quote, "We've seen this before. Private groups latch onto a suspect and build a narrative around them. Until you have DNA, fingerprints, or a direct witness tie-in, it's just another theory." Post remains an intriguing possibility in the eyes of some amateur sleuths, but official investigators have not endorsed the theory. Two additional names frequently surface in discussions of Zodiac suspects: Don Chaney and Ross Sullivan. Chaney, the same man who originally tipped off police about Arthur Leigh Allen, was occasionally suggested as a suspect himself. Conspiracy-minded researchers speculated that Chaney might have deflected attention onto Allen to shield himself. They pointed out that Chaney had detailed knowledge of the Zodiac's methods and fantasies. Yet investigators found no direct evidence against Chaney, and most dismissed the idea as a distraction. Chaney was a credible witness, Detective Ken Narlow explained in interviews. Quote, "He had no reason to believe he was involved beyond providing information." Ross Sullivan, on the other hand, was a library assistant at Riverside City College, where victim Cherry Jo Bates was murdered in 1966. Some theorists believe that Bates was an early Zodiac victim, though this connection remains disputed, I should say. Sullivan matched the general description of the Zodiac: stocky and socially awkward, and he reportedly disappeared from work for several days after Bates' murder. Sullivan also had a history of mental health struggles and brushes with the law, which fueled suspicion. But once again, no physical evidence tied him to any Zodiac crime scene. Investigators who reviewed the Sullivan theory noted that he moved out of California during the height of the Zodiac killings, making it unlikely that he could have committed all the crimes attributed to the killer. As one SFPD detective put it, Sullivan looked good on paper, but we couldn't make the leap from coincidence to culpability. Excuse me. While the Zodiac letters stopped in the mid-70s, the Bay Area exhaled, but investigators knew the file was merely going dormant. Battered case folders migrated from active-duty homicide teams to unsolved shelves, where they languished beneath layers of bureaucracy, budget cuts, leadership turnover, and shifting public priorities reduced a once intense manhunt to occasional tip checks. Even the FBI's BSU could devote only minimal time while new serial crises demanded attention. Yet the story refused to die. Each anniversary of the killer's taunting letters sparked headlines, and whenever another notorious case, Green River, BTK, was cracked, reporters asked whether Zodiac might be next. 290's development reignited official curiosity. Computerized fingerprint databases let detectives rerun 1969 latents against millions of new entries, and California's expanded DNA collection statutes promised future genetic comparisons. The digital revolution of the 2000s unleashed a torrent of online armchair sleuths. Tom Voigt's ZodiacKiller.com crowdsourced scans of letters and police reports, transforming the mystery into an interactive puzzle. Retired SFPD Inspector Jim O'Connor later stated, "We went from begging for tips tips, to drowning in them. Tips were logged, cross-indexed, and too often abandoned when staffing shifted again. One overlooked dimension is the legal environment. California's Public Records Act gradually pried open once sealed files. Journalists cheered the transparency. Detectives worried that hoaxers could parrot leak details, contaminating future witness statements. Agencies now redact interview transcripts and delay releasing forensic notes until suspects are deceased or the statute of limitations on related offenses lapses. Despite bureaucracy, periodic task force revivals occurred. In 2007, Vallejo, Napa, and San Francisco jointly digitized thousands of pages, hoping pattern recognition software would surface hidden links. Funding evaporated in 2012, and the joint unit folded, but the file never truly closed. Those episodic revivals, though brief, ensured the investigative torch never fully dimmed. Each new detective inherited a legacy file, and with it, a stubborn sense of unfinished duty. Some likened the handoff to a relay race with no finish line and constantly shifting investigative terrain. Real optimism flared in May 2018, weeks after Joseph James D'Angelo's arrest as the Golden State Killer. Inspired, Vallejo detectives shipped 2 Zodiac envelopes to a private lab, hoping saliva on the stamps could yield a genetic profile for GED match-style genealogy. Detective Terry Poyser told the Sacramento Bee he was, quote, cautiously optimistic the same technique might expose Zodiac's family tree. Sacramento Bee results remain undisclosed, but the attempt proved the case still warranted lab budgets. While genealogy stalled, cryptanalysis scored a headline-grabbing victory. On December 5th, 2020, civilian codebreakers David Orenchek, Sam Blake, and Jarl Van Eek cracked the 340-character cipher. The FBI confirmed their solution a week later, and the register decoded text equal parts taunt and nihilistic brag. Offered no names or addresses, but it validated BSU theories that Zodiac's real thrill was psychological dominance. The cipher breakthrough briefly fattened lab budgets for renewed DNA work. Forensic scientist Dr. Suzanne Mento likens the case to a 1,000-piece jigsaw with half the pieces water damaged. Cracking one corner doesn't finish the picture. Still, every scientific stride underscores the value of evidence preservation. San Francisco's cold case unit now stores each envelope, latent print, and fiber in climate-controlled vaults. Napa follows suit, rescanning partial fingerprints at resolutions impossible in 1969. From day one, the Zodiac cultivated a theatrical persona. Hollywood reciprocated. Director David Fincher's 2007 film, Zodiac, reintroduced the mystery to millennials, while podcasts like Monster and thousands of YouTube deep dives keep theories fermenting. Sensational headlines blur fact and speculation, magnifying fringe suspects and clickbait confessions. Interactive media magnifies the fascination. Video game side quests, escape room narratives, and augmented reality apps invite players to decode Fox ciphers, blurring entertainment with historical tragedy. Critics call this gamification a trivialization of real pain. Defenders say it keeps victims' names alive. Netflix's Mindhunter, featuring a fictionalized John Douglas, triggered a 300% spike in Google's searches for FBI profiling Zodiac the week it dropped. Tabloid frenzy peaked again in 2021 when the amateur casebreakers group named house painter Gary Francis Post as the killer. The FBI swiftly reiterated, quote, the case remains open and there is no new information to report. The independent SFPD detectives dubbed the resulting tip Avalanche Siphius with subpoenas. Media myth-making effects survivors, Brian Hartnell, wounded at Lake Berryessa, rarely grants interviews, fearing soundbite distortions. Conversely, Betty Lou Jensen's sister partnered with Netflix in hopes renewed visibility might jog a dormant memory. Sociologist Dr. Elena Vargas frames it thus, quote, "Every letter was both confession and psychological warfare leaflet. Her data show Bay Area newspaper circulation jumped 12% on Zodiac letter days. Evidence that fear, too, has a business model." Conversation with surviving investigators revealed dedication, burnout, and stubborn hope. Former SFPD Inspector Bill Armstrong recalls spending Christmas Eve 1970 chasing a bogus tip in Modesto. "We fingerprinted the guy in a broom closet and released him before dawn." Retired Napa detective Ken Narlow said the case sharpened his skepticism. After 5 psychics pointed to the same redwood stump, you ask for GPS coordinates. Modern researchers echo that mix of doubt and drive. Author Michael Butterfield warns novices, start with a suspect and you'll find evidence everywhere. Journalist Kevin Fagan, who covered the saga until his 2025 retirement, still believes crowd interest is useful energy. Somewhere in that haystack of tips is the needle. You just need the right magnet. Quantico now institutionalizes those lessons. The 2024 curriculum added a legacy serial cases module. Cadets dissect Zodiac, BTK, and Green River, learning how data silos cripple investigations. Instructor SSA Lena Martinez has trainees triage hundreds of simulated tips. Today's digital echo of Tashi's overflowing binders. More than 50 years on, the Zodiac case is both over-investigated and undersolved. Authorities had mountains of reports, yet none delivers courtroom-grade proof. Prime suspect Arthur Leigh Allen died in 92, Gary Francis Post in 2018, Ross Sullivan in 1977. Don Chaney survives but remains uncharged. The killer himself may be dead, rendering definitive justice elusive. Still, closure isn't the only metric. BSU profiling is now standard. DNA sequencing advances yearly. The 340 cipher triumph shows intellectual persistence can crack decades-old puzzles. Each archive digitized and each envelope retested narrows the abyss in which the killer once hid. In practical terms, that means detectives still catalog every rumor, however outlandish, because history shows truth sometimes arrives wearing unlikely clothes. The public may tire, but evidence does not grow weary. It simply waits, inert but patient, for science to mature around it. Whoever the Zodiac was, he wielded anonymity like a weapon. Today, that cloak frays under genealogical databases that nick distant cousins into genetic maps. Excuse me. Oh, my throat. One stray familial match could light up a cold case analyst's screen, ending the mystery not with a dramatic arrest, but a quiet lab report. Until then, detectives, historian, and citizen sleuths persist in the incremental labor, turning chaos into chronology. Their work affirms a deeper truth. Justice can be the relentless refusal to forget. The Zodiac may have chased shadows, but those pursuing him cast their own. Silhouettes of perseverance pointing towards an answer they still believe lies beyond just the next cipher, the next database, the next envelope flap. So, let me know your thoughts on the Zodiac Killer. Do you think we'll ever figure out who he is? Do you think he was Arthur Leigh Allen? Let me know. Of course, if you want to support the channel, you can buy us a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/TCNS or scan the QR code that you see on screen. As always, you can find us on all major podcast platforms, Amazon, Google, Good Pods, wherever you listen to your podcasts. As always, thank you so much for watching and listening. We'll see you next time.